Alright folks, my name is Freyn and welcome to the ultimate guide to the Yi-Ling, covering, well, hopefully everything you could possibly need to know about Ark's newest community submitted creature. If you find this helpful, please do consider supporting the channel, but for now, let's get started. So the Yi can only spawn in the green zone, and there are a total of 15 points defined for this, with the game aiming to put a pair in each one. Of course, they can wander a little bit, and if they do get too far, more may appear in their place, but overall the game does aim to try and have 30 on the map at once. The highest concentration is more towards the west, in the valley just below the portals, but you can still find a few isolated pockets out in the eastern forests. Now before you begin taming your Yi, you're going to need a few things. Handful of plant species Z fruit to stun it, some narcotic inducing food to knock it out, and of course some taming food to actually feed it. I also recommend making sure you've got a good few points in health and some reasonable armor, as part of the process is letting it attack you, and it's certainly smart to have a few sleeping bags down nearby, as the timing can be tricky and any misses will result in a very swift death. And finally, a metal shield does have some potential use here, but it is by far the least important of these items, so don't fret too much if you can't get one. Now once all of that is ready, you need to make sure your area is nice and clear, and then get its aggro. It'll leap into the air if it's not already, and start gliding around you in a wide circle, peppering you with feathers. Now these feathers don't deal a huge amount of damage on their own, but there is going to be a lot of them coming at you over the course of this taming. And at least for now, they must hit you. You cannot block them. Now sometime after reaching 30 feathers, which you can either see via the counter in the lower right, or if you're so inclined you can watch its wings for a red trail, but sometime after reaching 30, it will attempt to make a sort of diving attack at you. And it's at this point that you have to hit it with your Species Z grenade to stun it. Now, as you may imagine, this isn't a very big window. The dive is literally a single second. So what I recommend doing for this is keep your camera pointed as far down as you can while still having the Yi visible, and just throw the grenade at your feet the moment you see the dive. And that way, by the time it goes off, the Yi will be in the blast radius. Now if you fail, well, you're either going to be dead or in a lot of pain. But if you succeed, the Yi will be stunned for 8 seconds and you need to run over and feed it the narcotic of your choice. Biotoxin is by far the best for this stage, with 6 successful feeds being required for a 150, but narcotics and acerbic mushrooms can be used if necessary. Now fortunately, doing this all successfully does not remove your feather stacks, so subsequent dives should be coming much quicker. This is also the point a shield can come in handy, because without having to build stacks, you can now block the feathers to prevent some of that incoming damage while you wait for the next dive. You cannot hold the fruit and shield at the same time though, so as soon as you see the trails turn red, signaling the Yi is ready to dive, you need to swap back. From here on out though, it is just a case of repeating the process until its torpor has been raised enough that it falls asleep and you can finally feed it. In terms of food, exceptional kibble is the best, with 12 needed for a 150 on official settings, followed by your typical carnivore feeding options of mutton, prime, and raw or cooked meats. Now if you're having trouble or think you're going to have trouble with the timing on this, one way you can make it easier on yourself is to build a sort of cage to stand in. Start by placing 4 foundations of stone or above in a square, then 2 layers of single doorways all the way around, and then stand yourself right in the center. And this way, when the Yi dives at you, it'll get caught on those door frames, both preventing the damage and giving you an extra second or two to throw the grenade and get that all-important stun. Now I have had some success with a smaller single foundation design here, but due to the hitbox range on the attack, you end up having to completely close off 2 sides, which results in a much more limited vision for the Yi, and therefore less frequent dives and a slower process overall. Okay, I think that's enough about acquisition. Let's have a look at it, shall we? Now obviously we don't really have a very good creature to compare it to here, the only other glider available being the Drake. So a bit awkwardly, I think I'm going to actually use the Ravager for this as an aberration creature of roughly the same saddle level. And well, we can see it does fall behind in health, stamina and damage there, although not by too much, which considering the different roles, I think that could have been much worse. You know, you don't expect something of this nature to be that tanky or heavy hitting. And overall, I think that's a fairly decent stat line, although that very low weight is definitely going to hurt. Now as far as mobility goes, it's completely on par for ground speed, as well as somehow faster in the water. And of course, having that huge gliding advantage which tops out at a whopping 41 meters per second. For other aspects, we have an extremely low drag weight of only 125, allowing it to both enter boss arenas and get the full bonuses out of current traits, while the ability to use weapons while riding and a massive fall damage reduction down to only 12.5% help to further cement it as a just generally good travel mount. In terms of saddle, you're going to be looking at level 50 with a relatively low cost of 110 hide, 65 fibre and 20 wood, while improved versions can be found in green and up drops in the just general underground areas, purple and up in the caves, and blue and up on the surface. And finally, as far as breeding goes, it produces large eggs for superior kibble, with a hatch time of 5 hours at 38 to 42 degrees, an overall growth time of just over 46 hours, and a mating cooldown of between 18 and 48 hours, all on official rates of course. Okay, time to look at some abilities then, starting with our mobility tools, the first of which is a short directional dash. By pressing the crouch key while holding a direction, you can rapidly move out the way of incoming enemies, pop up from the water surface, or if in glide mode, gain a bit of extra altitude. With a very comfortable 3-second cooldown, a good player could really make use of this to help keep their Yi alive, although it can only be used once for altitude per glide without either landing, latching, or doing a rupture attack first. And speaking of gliding, all it takes to get airborne is to tap the jump key while already in the air. Quick, simple to control, and with a low stamina cost of only 2 per second, gliding is a fantastic tool to get around and honestly just a lot of fun to use. As mentioned, using the dash while in the air will either zip briefly to the side or give you a nice height bump. And if you should happen to bump into a surface while gliding around, you can press the jump key again to latch on in much the same way as a Tapejara, allowing you to pause for some stamina regeneration at a rate of 5 per second. It is important to note that gliding isn't a guaranteed escape tool though, as taking any melee damage or losing over half of its health in general will cancel the glide, and it's not the hardiest of creatures, so you don't really want to get stuck on the ground if you can avoid it. Moving on, we have our feather attack, only usable while gliding or latching. Pressing your secondary attack key will fire a burst of 5 feathers at a cost of 5 stamina, and each target can receive a maximum of 100 feathers embedded at a time. They don't do much damage on their own, with the base being only a measly 2, but they are needed to be able to execute the rupture, and they come in 5 different varieties. The first, Razor, is the default, available at all times. The second is Sedate, activated by force feeding your Yi some biotoxin. The third is Slime, brought on by a sap feeding. The fourth is Poison, which comes from Nameless Venom. And the fifth is Volatile, coming from congealed gas. One feeding of any of these resources will provide 5 minutes of its respective feather time, and all feathers will regenerate naturally over time at a speed dependent on your current stamina. 0.5 feathers per second at 240 stamina or below, all the way up to 2 feathers per second at 2400 and above. Now as said, the feathers on their own, not really anything special, but they are the key to our final function here, Rupture, which again must be used during a glide. Once some feathers are embedded in a target, you can press the melee and primary attack keys together to trigger your dive bomb. tearing out all feathers and triggering an effect depending on which types were present, with multiple able to be activated at once. Razor feathers will inflict simple raw damage at a rate of 4 times your melee stat per feather, and then further amplified depending on how low your target's current health is. Sedate feathers inflict torpor at a rate of 10 plus 2.5 times your melee stat. Slime inflicts a 60% movement debuff that lasts for 1 second per feather used. Poison inflicts damage over time at a rate of 7 times your melee stat per feather, again amplified by target's health and dealt over 15 seconds. And finally, the volatile feathers reduce the target's armor by 30% of its value above primitive, by which I mean it does absolutely nothing against primitive or unarmored targets, but for instance if you have a saddle with 120 armor on it, it will reduce that armor by 30. Now all these tools combined make for a very skill-based creature. Knowing when to use which feathers and how many, managing your stamina and mobility to keep yourself safe. I think some people could get some really good use out of this. There's even a bit of potential for boss fighting in there, as although the Rupture cannot actually be used in a boss fight due to being entirely debuff based, you can still glide and use rider weaponry. So with some good control, well-timed dashes and a decent shotgun, it could still enable you to actually take down a boss. There we have it. That is everything I can tell you about the Yi-Ling. I hope this has been useful to you. If you have any questions, please do feel free to drop them in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.